Oh yes, Tomb World is here. It's finally arrived, and I've been busy in the tombs, building and painting, and today we're looking at the Necrons. Today we're looking at the Canoptek Circle. This is a very simple and easy paint scheme to replicate, so let's dive in. After having assembled all my models, I'm starting off with a basic black prime, as I always do. I'm making sure that I get all over the model and all into the small mechanical bits. They've got like these kind of wings as well, so I'm trying to get underneath those. And then I'm going in with a white and picking and choosing where I want to add these highlights. So obviously around all the glowing areas, but on these big scythes and legs, I'm just doing a kind of band across the middle. This paint scheme is pretty heavy on the airbrush. You could replicate this with a brush as well, with some dry brushing. And then before I even begin the paint scheme, I wanted to get the bases kind of prepped, because it's going to get quite delicate and difficult. So this is just a texture paint that I'm just applying. And then once that's dry, I'm starting off with the paint scheme. For all of the mechanical inner workings, I'm using Occultist Cloak. And I'm just kind of really messily sponging this on with a brush, getting all into the small areas underneath and on those legs and everything. As I'm doing this, I'm kind of mapping out which sections of the model I'm going to do in different colors. So this is a great way to kind of get used to the different sculpts and finding those small areas that you need to hit later on. And once that's dry, I'm then moving on to these kind of shell sections of the models. So for this, I'm using dark green grey, and I'm just adding a single coat on here, and I'm just taking some care not to hit these glowing sections, but I know that I'm going to come in later on and tidy these up. So I'm just making sure that I get into all the little vents and the cracks and things on the main carapace. And then for the leader, I'm just choosing some sections, so I'm picking his rib cage and this back section right here. I'm then going to start dry brushing with some Cobalt metal, and this is a great way to kind of create a metallic finish without having to like cover the whole thing in a metallic paint. It may look like a little bit aggressive, but I'm just making sure that I get most of these areas with a quick highlight of this metal paint. And then once that's done, I've then decided to shade that green section with Coelia Greenshade. And this has some blue in it, so it's got this nice kind of otherworldly greenish blue hue to it. And it's going to darken those green sections quite a bit. The other thing this does, which is great, is it's going to highlight all those little cracks and chips and damage. Next up, I'm highlighting all of those orbs that I'm planning on having a glowing element to. So I'm going in and basing those in with a bold titanium white. And I'm taking just a little bit of care not to get it onto that metallic section I've already painted. If there is some overspill, that's fine, because we're going to airbrush these sections. And then for this, I'm using a titanium white ink, because this flows through the airbrush really nicely and creates a nice kind of puff of white. Again, if you don't have an airbrush, you could totally dry brush this. It wouldn't be as smooth, but you'd still get that glowing effect. And then for that classic Necron green glow, I'm using a light green from AK. And I'm just hitting some areas that are already in white. I'm not too worried about overspray at this point, because that kind of adds to that glowing effect. So I'm just making sure that I don't hit too much of the model, but it does have some kind of glow around it. Once that's done, I decided to do all of the orbs on the face by hand. So this is just that same light green from the airbrush earlier, but I'm just painting these on because the faceplates are kind of delicate and I want to keep that look to them. Any of these areas of like channels around the guns, I'm using that white ink. And then once that's done, I then decided to kind of boost that green up with some yellow fluorescent paint. And what this is going to do, even though it's yellow, it's really boosting that green brightness. I'm making sure that I get all these little areas, and it's a very thin paint, so it is going to run into some of the crevices. And then those white ink channels that I painted earlier, and then covering with that fluorescent paint, this really helps to kind of add to that glow as well. It boosts that saturation of that glow. It's almost like glazing as well, because you're not adding like full brush strokes. Once that's dry, I've mixed in just a small amount of warm grey into that original green colour, and I'm starting to edge highlight these panels. You could of course do this first and then do the spray over, but I wanted to just make sure that those highlights were really nice and crisp. I'm also kind of splotching on some of that damage, adding some of those small hairline cracks. This is really where I found most of the detail to be on this paint scheme. You could go crazy and do all the little workings on the legs and things, but I just wanted to keep it a fairly simple paint scheme, but with some really punchy glows to it. For the leader, I'm using some Elven gold, and I've decided to hit these little shoulder pad sections right here. I figured as you go higher up in the hierarchy, they get more and more gold on this paint scheme. So again, I'm just adding some little accent colors of gold. I didn't actually see the Games Workshop official paint job. I ended up replicating it almost one-to-one by accident, but this was kind of in my mind's eye. I was thinking, oh yeah, some gold would be a great accent color. For these big spider tanks, I'm using some of the Elven gold to highlight this kind of runic inscription. And then for all the tubes, I'm using a black Templar speed paint. You could of course do that same glowing green if you wanted to stay closer to the official Games Workshop colors, but I wanted to kind of imply that there's a lot of wires and things hanging down from these guys. For the face, I'm using bold titanium white as a starting color, and white's really tough to paint, so I will be shading this and re-highlighting this up again. And for his staff, I decided to do a different kind of glow. This had a really nice zenithal fall off on it from the white to the black, so I just kind of played with that with some Tesseract glow. This is a much more yellowy green, and it just kind of helps distinguish the different greens on the model. For the handle of the staff, I used Ratling Grime, but you could totally use that same Black Templar. And then I decided to shade the face with a watered down Drakonhof Nightshade. This was kind of a blue-black shade, and it helped just to add some small definition to the white face. For the big floating ruin thing that he's climbing on, I decided to go with a Hive Dweller purple. And this is kind of a hint as to the color scheme I'm thinking of for the terrain itself that comes in the box. But I wanted to kind of break away from what Games Workshop had done. I kind of subconsciously replicated it by accident, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. For the staff, I used a Seraphim Sepia. This is a great shade for golds. It kind of adds some warmth and orange saturation to the gold color, as well as just kind of adding some shadows and definition. I mixed together a fairly simple light green with some of that green and white that was still on the palette, and I'm starting to add some edge highlights to this kind of hologram thing that he has, just because it was looking a little plain. For the bases on the plasmacytes, I used Gravelord Grey. They're kind of on these sort of pseudo flying stands, and I wanted to just make sure that they kind of blended in. And then once the bases were dry, I then dry brushed with a Baneblade brown. I didn't want to detract from the main show, which is kind of the Necron-y green glow, so I wanted to keep those earthy tones fairly similar to that kind of mechanical grey. I went one stage higher with some Mojave white and just very loosely dry brushed some edge highlights. And then for the tiny little spiders, I went in with that same Elven gold color and hit that kind of carapace that they have, followed by just a tiny little dot of that light green. I'd forgotten about the big glowing orb in the middle, so I went back in with the airbrush and then just added that same glow technique that I'd done before. And here is the Canoptek Circle. This was a very, very quick paint scheme, but it was super fun to do. Again, I completely must have subconsciously maybe absorbed the paint color scheme from Games Workshop and accidentally I thought it was being original, but it wasn't. It was totally the same colors or similar colors. Yeah, really happy with the way they turned out. And again, this is probably the most amount of like actual technical airbrushing that I've done, other than just priming and in a few spots here and there. And it was really fun to kind of control the airbrush and get that kind of glow that I'm looking for. There is some overspray and it's a little messy in places, but I think it adds to like the overall like green glow in the darkness that these guys are giving off. Also, adding that fluorescent yellow really bumps up that saturation. The camera and the pictures don't really do it as much justice as it is in real life. As always, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you played the new Tomb World yet? And let me know what you want to see next. I've got Deathwatch sitting on my desk ready to go. I've got the terrain ready to go. So let me know down in the comments below what you want to see painted next. Liking, subscribing, and commenting on the video really does help me out. And there's links below to all my Patreon and extras. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in the next one.